there, this is Susan Beyer, and this is Fun with Research. I'm excited about this week's topic because we're talking about Fricken Likerts. That's right, Likert scales. If you've ever taken a survey, you've seen one. And hopefully the name of this episode will remind you not to call them Likert scales. They are Likert scales. They're named after Rensis Likert, who was a social psychologist who developed the scales as part of his PhD thesis in the 1930s. So Likert it is. And I'm going to show you an example now on the screen of a standard Likert scale. You can see this goes from disagree completely on the left to agree completely on the right. And it has a midpoint that says I don't disagree or agree in the middle. That's a standard, pretty standard Likert scale. Likert scales measure the intensity of feelings about something. So agree completely is very different from agree mildly, and disagree completely is very different from that. So they're used in social psychology and education and a lot of other things, including marketing, so which is why you see them a lot on marketing surveys. So there's two things you really need to think about with regard to your Likert scales. Number one is, how big is the range of your scale going to be? This is an example of a ridiculously short Likert scale where we only have 3 points, the left, the right, and the middle. And as you can imagine, if your scale were this short, it'd be very hard to differentiate between the responses of people in your survey with any degree of sort of nuance or granularity because they only have 3 choices, right? On the other hand, this example, which is a 15-point Likert scale, is ridiculous. Don't ever do this to anyone. You know, somebody's going to look at that and abandon your survey completely. Typically, Likert scales can be from maybe 5 to 8 or 9, maybe 10. Kind of depends, but depending on the kind of analysis you're going to do with the data that you get from your Likert scale responses, you want to think about the appropriate range of your scale. So that's the first thing that you need to think about. The second thing you need to think about is whether you should have a central point on your scale. And I get this question a lot from clients as we're developing surveys for them as to whether there should be a central point. And to understand what I'm talking about, here's an example of a scale with a midpoint. This is the one we saw at the beginning, right? It has that point in the middle that says I don't agree or disagree. And here's another example of a Likert scale that does not have a midpoint, as you can see. Now, there's clearly a midpoint to the range of things on this scale between agree and disagree. There's clearly a neutral position that someone could hold, but the scale doesn't represent the neutral position. So it's still symmetrical. It just doesn't have that dot in the middle that lets you pick the central position. And there are a few reasons why you might want to do this. Number one is, this is called a forced response option. And what it does is make the people taking your survey pick a lane, right? They have to decide which side of that line they're on. When you don't have a midpoint, as you'll see in that scale, often the points on either side of what would be the midpoint are labeled mildly agree or mildly disagree, or agree or disagree a little bit, or something like that, so that people kind of get a sense of where the mildest options are on the scale. But it forces the respondent to pick one side of the scale or the other, even in the mildest terms. And that can be helpful if, for example, you're doing a critical analysis on this data that's the foundation of the whole reason you're doing the survey, and you want to force an opinion on these people. And they're all things that they could have an opinion of. That's very important, okay? Now, there has been research suggesting that when you have a midpoint on the scale, people who just don't want to invest the intellectual effort or time in reading the question and sort of thinking about their position on it may choose the center point just to get through the thing as fast as they can. And in that case, their choice of the center point doesn't represent what you may think it does. It doesn't represent a neutral position. It represents, I don't want to answer this, get me through this darn survey. So that can be a little bit of a problem. There's also the possibility, as you see in our examples, where the question is that their rating is, the statement is, I enjoy eating raw oysters. Well, what about somebody who has never eaten a raw oyster, so doesn't know whether they enjoy it or not? That statement doesn't seem like something they can agree or disagree with, does it? And in that case, you want to make sure that you have an I can't answer this, I'm unable to rate option, as you'll see in this example here, because otherwise that person, given no other option, is going to pick that middle point on the scale. But their answer isn't telling you what you think it's telling you. So if you don't have this doesn't apply to me, I can't answer this option, they're given no other choice. So there are a variety of reasons why you might choose a midpoint or not choose a midpoint, and both of them are correct. There's not a right or a wrong way to do this, but you do have to think about what the options are for your respondents if you don't have a midpoint to choose from. And if you do have a midpoint, you have to be aware that it may not represent for some of your respondents what you think it does. There are some people who offer a midpoint, but then remove all of those ratings that were at the midpoint from their analysis, just so that they know that they're not misinterpreting somebody's lack of interest for an actual neutral attitude on that and that statement. So that's something to think about. Hopefully that demystifies Likert scales a little bit for you. Your research provider or consultant can definitely have the conversation with you about what is the right type of scale to use in your situation, given what you're trying to find out, who you're surveying, and what kind of analysis you're doing with those data. But hopefully that helps a little bit. Always great having you come and visit Fun with Research. Check out funwithresearch.com for more resources. They're all free, and we'll be here next week with another video. Have a great day.